13 Days in Solem County, Chapter 3. Night Fishing. At long last, Z heard the rumble of the old pickup approaching from the distance. He guessed he could make out the clamor from the time the attendant turned off the main road. The noise grew louder until it reached the front yard. Minutes later, a shadow appeared in the darkness at the edge of the shed. Assuming it must be the attendant, Z said, "Oh man, am I glad to see you. I was starting to think you'd forgot about me." Z eased himself upright, scooped up his change and other belongings, and returned them to his pockets. With no mention of the workings of the day, or how much lumber he had completed, Z held up his heavy pants with one hand and said, "Hey, I really need something to eat. I haven't had any food today, or really since before I got here yesterday. I got a lot of wood done, but I'm pooped. Do you have any food? I'll pay if I have to. I've got a little cash." The attendant only replied, "No." Z attempted to hide the quiver in his voice. "There has to be some food around here somewhere. I mean, what do you eat?" After more silent contemplation, the attendant said, "I go fishing." "Fishing?" Z asked. "Do you have any fish? What good does that do me now?" The attendant said, "Well, I was planning on going tonight. I guess you could come and try your luck too if you wanted to." Perplexed, Z asked, "At night? Best time for it." Every ounce of intuition Z possessed screamed for him not to become further indebted, but he asked anyway, "Do you have an extra rod? I didn't exactly bring one with me." "Honey Pie wouldn't mind if you borrowed hers," he offered. Surprised by the attendant's sudden generosity, Z was both thankful and wary. So it was decided. Z would go fishing with the still nameless attendant for his supper. Z followed the attendant back through the maze surrounding the shack and reclaimed his place in the truck. If he could call the rippled seat comfortable, Z was grateful for a softer surface to sit upon and rejoiced as he slouched his weary shoulders against the vinyl backrest. He closed his eyes and waited. After a moment, the attendant soon returned with 2 rods and a tackle box and laid them in the truck bed. Without speaking, he got behind the wheel, started the engine, and headed further up the dusty mountain road. As the truck crawled up the trail, Z kept his eyes shut and took some deep breaths. Earlier, he had tried to stay alert and pay attention to his surroundings, but now everything looked the same in the dark, and besides, he was fresh out of give a crap. The pickup swayed and bounced up the trail. The crisp night air through the open window refreshed Z as he faded in and out of consciousness. An almost divine peace settled on him as the truck rocked him like a newborn mother. The pickup swayed and bounced up the trail. The crisp night air through the open window refreshed Z as he faded in and out of consciousness. An almost divine peace settled on him as the truck rocked him like a new mother trying to get her fussy newborn to sleep in its crib. At this moment, Z neither minded the awkward silence of the attendant, nor was he anxious over his circumstances. At this moment, he simply existed. Unaware of how far they had journeyed, Z sobered as hard jolts and bumps replaced the gentle rocking. Lit by headlights, the track had become narrow and perilous. Clutching the frame through the open window, Z held on. With his hands occupied, a few coins escaped Z's overstuffed pocket, like tiny refugees taking shelter in the deep crevices of the tattered seat. Well into the night, the attendant pulled off the road into a clearing by the banks of an immense body of water. He turned off his truck and got out in the same painstaking fashion Z had observed the first time. When Z followed suit and attempted to slide from his seat, he found himself going through the same routine as his stiff-bodied pilot. Z stood in the clearing, attempting to maintain his footing like a newborn calf. There, he beheld a picturesque scene. An immeasurable number of stars accompanied a brilliant half-moon in the cloudless night sky. It hung like a celestial lantern over a vast crystal lake, illuminating the still surface and the surrounding banks. The sense of serenity was spoiled after looking down. Z noted the foliage between him and the banks was unruly, waist-high, and a certain sanctuary for various venomous critters. The attendant hoisted a large car battery from the bed of the truck and heaved it at Z. "Here," he said, then pushed into the dense undergrowth with the fishing gear. Z quickly realized he needed both hands to lug the battery. He trudged through the tall grasses with his trousers drooping under the weight of the remaining coins in his pockets, watching for serpents all the while. On the banks, a small aluminum boat lay nestled among the bushes. Z held a lighter as the attendant attached the battery to a trolling motor. On the craft's floor was a fishing net, some oars, and other assorted debris, but no life jackets. After settling into the boat, Z steadied himself as the attendant pushed off from the bank and hopped inside, surprisingly agile for a man who otherwise seemed barely able to move at all. When the boat had drifted from the shore, the attendant switched on the motor. It hummed quietly as it propelled the two men across the lake, with the attendant manning the rudder. "I know a real good spot on the other side of the lake," he reassured Z. Beneath the clear sky, they traveled for a long while before coming to a stop, possibly in the dead center of the lake, and with the shoreline seemingly miles away. Troubled, Z wondered how the attendant identified their destination with no global navigation devices or clues other than the stars. After handing Z a rod, without a word, the attendant cast his own line out into the surrounding abyss. "What are we supposed to use for bait?" Z asked. "Crankbait," the attendant replied. There was some type of lure already attached to the end of Z's line. Not wanting to appear ignorant, he cast it into the void with no further questions. The small splash resounded against the backdrop of the otherwise silent night. Repeatedly casting and reeling, they each fished for a considerable amount of time without even a nibble. Z, exasperated, said, "Are you sure there's any fish in here?" "Oh yeah, I catch fish here all the time," said the attendant. "But it doesn't look like they're biting here tonight. I know a better spot. Go on and pull your line in." Z did so, and soon they were headed off to some other nondescript spot on the vast water. After another half hour of trolling, the attendant switched off the motor. In the middle of goodness knows where, they repeated the same scene as before, and still with no success. Not wanting to complain, Z held his peace as late night became early morning. Then, with his body nearing collapse, he had to break the silence. "I hate to spoil the fun, but I need to get some sleep." Against the stunning backdrop of the starlit night, Z could feel the weight of the attendant's reluctance. At length, he surrendered and conceded. "All right, then. We can try again tomorrow if you want." Taking on the attendant's mannerisms, Z said nothing. Switching on the motor a final time, they began the lengthy trek to shore. But before covering any considerable distance, the electric motor grew tired, slowed, and stopped. It left the pair adrift. Reacting as though nothing in the world was wrong, the attendant said, "Looks like we're going to have to row the rest of the way." Each man took an oar and began to paddle. Down the dismal stream, Z rowed his boat, not feeling merry at all. The glow of the early morning sun only disheartened the weary fisherman as it crested the mountainside. A cacophony of gleeful tweets greeted the men as forest fowl performed their morning masterpieces, while other wildlife scurried along the banks, frolicking to their tunes. The sun was high in the sky, beaming down on them as they arrived back at their starting point. The attendant unhooked the battery. Without speaking, Z grabbed the load, retraced his steps, set it back in the truck, and climbed in. His lips were dry. His body felt both electric and shaky. Slowly, they snaked back down the mountain. When they arrived back at the homestead, the attendant asked, "You gonna work?" The attendant's words sounded more like an accusation than a question. Trying to keep his composure, Z trembled and said, "I have to eat something, and I need water." Standing steadfast, the attendant said, "If you're going to be able to get out of here, you're going to have to earn it. Now go on and get back to work, and I'll see if I can find you something to bring you when I come back." Unable to believe what was happening, Z slid speechless from his seat and staggered down the path he thought most likely to lead him to the shed. There, he listened as the truck vanished down the road. Z plopped onto his bucket and buried his face in his hands, then pulled sticky fingers through his matted hair. What was he supposed to do now? Z considered his limited options. He wondered if Honey Pie was home. After pondering the matter for some time, he crept to the back door. Z rehearsed his words in his head. Not that he had trouble speaking to people, but he wanted to maintain his composure and keep the desperation out of his voice. At the house, he tapped on the back door. No answer. He knocked again, a little heavier this time, and waited. Nothing. He then persisted with knocking long and loud enough to reach a solid conclusion. Either no one was inside, or if they were, they weren't coming to the door. Walking around the house, peeping in windows, Z saw no signs of activity. Restraining himself from breaking in, he snooped about the yard instead. Amid the dry-rotted furniture, potting soil, and plastic flower pots on the far side of the shack, he found a wellhead. A pulley with a small bucket hung above a concrete cylinder with a metal lid. In the center of the lid was a bucket-sized door sealed fast with a fat padlock. After studying the cap for some time, he returned to the shed and retrieved a pry bar and a screwdriver from among the heaps of tools. Back at the well, he pried around the outside perimeter of the cap with his tools until he dislodged the entire cover. The steel lid was heavy, and moving it proved no insignificant task, yet he managed to scoot the well cap aside, locked door and all, off of its foundation, and slide it far enough to drop the bucket through the gap into the well. Water never tasted so good. He drank as much as he could stomach, then filled his 3 soft drink cans. Taking care not to leave any signs of tampering, he replaced the cover. Hydrated, his only option now was an obvious one: back to work. Unsure of what was keeping him going, Z sloshed back to the shed. In times past, he had partied all night and gone to a job the next day, or endured a long road trip with scant resources and little sleep. But he had never pushed his body to this extreme. Nevertheless, he soldiered on. His head was in a fog. Load a log, saw a log. Repeat. His breaks became more frequent. Z had exhausted his supply of vape juice by midday. Load a log, saw a log, repeat. Z guessed he wouldn't see the attendant until nightfall, same as the day before. His mind disconnected itself from sensation as he drudged through the rest of the day. Load a log, saw a log, repeat. As daylight faded, he sat on his bucket and took a tally of the now substantial stack of completed boards. He still had his room key and assumed the attendant would expect payment for the night previous, even though Z had spent it on the lake. Subtracting his rent, Z had earned $23.70 in 2 days. As expected, Z now heard the unmistakable engine of the attendant's truck as it climbed the road well after dark. Instead of lingering in the shed this time, Z awaited the attendant's arrival out front. When the attendant arrived, Honey Pie was indeed with him. She gave Z a quick glance as she passed by without speaking, then retreated inside. Z had been rehearsing in his mind what he would say to the attendant when he saw him next. But when he approached, one word spewed out of Z's mouth in an uncontrollable impulse. "Food! Did you get me some food?" In his usual insensitive manner, the attendant stared at Z for a moment before speaking. "Oh yeah, craziest thing. A taco truck came through town today. I started eating one taco after another and, well, those tacos were so good I forgot all about you." Although the attendant's expression and tone scarcely changed, he seemed somehow proud of himself. "Ready to catch some fish? I got a fresh charge on the battery." Z had no idea how to respond. This man is screwing with me, and he is enjoying this. Z needed a break. He needed a lot of things, but only answered, "No, not tonight." Through squinted eyes and gritted teeth, Z asked, "Can you please just take me back to my room?" "Okay, it's your supper," the attendant said. Still, with no mention of the amount of lumber completed, they got into the truck and headed into town. Although neither man spoke a word on the return journey, the trip passed quickly. As they traveled, Z stared out the window into the darkness, furious, until they arrived at the motel. Z got out of the truck without looking at the attendant. He didn't look to see the attendant's reaction when he slammed the door behind him. Z then headed straight to the soda machine, where the mass of coins in his pocket proved useful. He purchased a drink and gulped it down in an instant. He straightway attempted to purchase 2 more, but when he pushed the button for his third drink, the sold out button lit up. He had to settle for his second choice, a dark, vanilla-flavored cola. Still okay. Z took a chance and fed the snack machine another 55 cents and tried to make a selection, but to no avail. Retreating to his room, he opened the drink and set it by the sink. Reaching underneath the basin, he felt around for his pistol. His fingers discovered it there in his spot, undisturbed. He retrieved it and examined it. After rolling the cylinder to ensure all the rounds remained in their chambers, he returned the firearm to its hiding place. He dug his vape juice from his pack and refilled his mod. After taking a healthy drag by the bathroom door, Z took up his soda and flopped onto the bed to think. His thoughts were a jumbled mess of distress, discomfort, and dismay. He found himself unable to form a reasonable conclusion to his happenstance. It wasn't long before he heard the attendant's truck crank and drive off. Maybe he really was going fishing. Peeping between the curtains, Z scanned the town. Cautiously leaving his room when he thought the coast was clear, Z made his way to the vending area and pretended to study its contents. He then sauntered over to the office. The vacancy light, along with the other lights within, were all off. Scanning the square, the town remained barren except for his crippled motorcycle and the disabled sheriff's car. Z set off towards his room, but instead of going inside, he passed by it and skulked around the side of the motel, ducking out of the street lamp's glow. He made a wide circle, almost out of town, and crossed the highway. After sneaking behind the city hall, he approached the abandoned sheriff car. He crept up beside it and snatched the peanut butter crackers from the dash, then retraced his steps. Hidden within his room, without a thought, Z ate the pack of stale crackers in an instant. When he had devoured his pilfered treat, it left him with a new dilemma. evidence. Anyone who cleaned the room, if anyone ever did, would find the rapper and peg him as the thief, and who knew what form local justice would take out here? Z stepped outside, slipped around the back of the motel, and stashed the plastic sleeve under some leaves. He then returned to his room, collapsed into the bed, and fell dead asleep. When Z opened his eyes around noontime the next day, his body ached. Hunger was now his closest companion. Disoriented, the last thing he remembered was sitting down on the bed. His movements were slow as he took a pull on the mod. Unsure of what he had gotten himself into, Z opened a warm drink and had a sip. Whatever his situation, one thing was certain: he was filthy. Perfumed with both gasoline and diesel exhaust, a noxious layer of sticky man sweat had caused the fine sawdust to cling to his clothes and beard like a plague of lice. The lethargic shower might have been considered lukewarm at best if Z used his imagination, but by now he knew better than to complain. After brushing his teeth, he still refused to swallow the water. While Z put the finishing touches on shaving his neck, he thought he heard a car door slam nearby. Instantly, he tossed his razor into the sink and dumped the contents of his pack onto the bed. Snatching his other pair of pants from the clutter, he pulled them on as he hopped over to the window. He laced his belt through its loops, knife, and chain wallet while peeping through the drapes. At the apparently out-of-service gas station across the street, Z saw a candy apple red, four-door sedan parked beside the solitary pump. The car was a newer model and looked out of place among the relics in this dying town. It was dusty, but it had no dents. The shiny padlock securing the pump's nozzle now lay opened on top of the housing. Through the motel window's dirty glass, he could make out the form of a young woman pumping gas. Without thought, Z grabbed a clean shirt and stepped outside as he finished buttoning it. Standing just beyond the doorway in the daylight, he observed that the woman fueling the car wasn't quite a woman yet. She was a girl. She couldn't have been over 13 years old, and barely that. She was slim and wore form-fitting faded jeans, boots with leather fringe, and a pastel-covered top. Her hair was straight and light brown, and her face was amiable, but also cool and indifferent behind adult-sized reflective sunglasses. She paid Z no attention as he stood transfixed across the way. After fueling her tank, she returned the nozzle to its slot and secured the handle with the padlock. Their glances met for a second as she walked around to get in her car, but Z only stared, glued to his spot. Before he could decide how to react, she was behind the wheel and heading out of town. With a deep sigh, Z scanned the rest of the town and considered his plight. Half expecting either a SWAT team or a mob of rabid, slack-jawed locals ready to lynch him over the theft of the crackers to wake him, he found the town desolate except for the wind, a few friendless birds, and the lonesome sheriff car across the way. The attendant's truck was also missing, and after a round of rapping on the office door and window with no response, the silence confirmed that Z was once again alone. After taking another deep breath, he purchased another soda from the drink machine and returned to his rancid room to make some sense of his dilemma. Pondering his predicament, he organized his belongings and placed them in the pockets in his pouch. The only thing he didn't pack was his pistol, which he left beneath the sink. Last night made the third night for which he owed the attendant payment for his room. Z barely had enough money to pay for one. With the attendant absent, Z had no way to return to the mill to earn his keep, and with his refusal to accompany the attendant fishing, Z wondered if he'd severed any ties, however faint, to his tenuous lifeline. A sense of doom and dread filled Z at the thought of becoming further obligated to the attendant for any help, if it could be called that. For the life of him, Z remained unable to understand the attendant's intentions, but he sensed something horribly amiss about his scenario and thought it prudent to prepare for a post-haste retreat from this place. Z even considered the possibility of having to abandon his beloved motorcycle if the time came. But not yet. It remained implausible that anyone would happen by and rescue him. He had neither seen nor heard any other traffic traveling this forsaken highway other than the trendy teen he had spied earlier. What was she doing here anyway? Even if Z saw her again, approaching someone so tender and refined in his current state of destitution could prove horrifying for the young girl. Besides his snowball's chance of finding help in another unlikely lost traveler, playing along with the attendant's racket still seemed Z's only option. Surely, after being gaffed by the grifter, his operator would resurface and he could finish milling the lumber, even if it meant staying a few more days. Entangled in his circumstances, Z realized he was eating a sucker's lunch, but after getting some rest, he felt like he could hold out a little longer if he must. Though doubtful, Z stayed outside his room that day, just in case someone happened by. Leaning on his motorcycle, he took a pull and waited for the attendant's return. As he had imagined, Z spent the day in quiet solitude. At least the temperature was mild. A cool breeze kept Z company as he listened to the carefree birds singing in the forest while he oscillated between his room, his bike, and the drink machine. With the lack of anything else to do, and desperate to relieve his gnawing hunger and internal anxiety, he was sucking up the last of his vape juice way too fast. Before the sun set, Z heard the attendant's clamorous ride approaching. Presently, a new knot formed in his already troubled stomach as the attendant parked in his normal spot in front of the office. As he turned off his truck, Z saw that tonight the attendant had a passenger with him, Honey Pie. As the pair climbed from the vehicle, Z put on his best face and approached them before they had a chance to go inside. With his best smile, Z greeted the attendant. "Hey, man, how's it going?" The attendant replied with his typical hollow stare while Honey Pie stood by the passenger side door. Burying his feelings, Z spoke to the attendant as if they were old friends. "I've been waiting on you. I was ready to saw up some wood, but it looks like it's getting kind of late for that tonight." In the attendant's cold eyes, Z found no compassion, no concern, nor anything decent about the man. And tonight, he had a partner in his silent censure. From across the cab, Honey Pie held a steady gaze on Z, her face just as stern. But in Honey Pie's dark eyes, Z also sensed a shred of curiosity. Eventually, the attendant said, "I tried to get you up this morning, but you wouldn't come to the door. I thought you might have been mad about something." Z said, "No, man, I was just tired. I didn't budge till about 11. I guess I didn't hear you knock. I didn't mean to be ill or anything. I only really needed some rest. I haven't worked that hard since my younger years. But I'm feeling a little better now, but I still need something to eat." "Pity. I caught a mess of 'em last night. Me and Honey Pie ate like king and queen." Z glanced at Honey Pie to see her reaction. She didn't budge. Looking back at the attendant, Z asked, "Any leftovers?" "No." "Of course not," Z laughed sardonically to himself as he inquired, "You still want to go fishing tonight?" After a moment, the attendant agreed. "All right, then." The attendant and Honey Pie went into the office. Z visited the soda machine and purchased 4 more drinks. Accepting his destiny, whatever it held, Z stacked his drinks on the dash through the open window and stepped into the truck. As he settled into his seat, he could still feel the warmth left from Honey Pie's body on the vinyl. There, he waited for his dubious escort as darkness settled on the town.